Was Northern Lords a success? The first flavor pack of Crusader Kings 3 has completed its lifespan. With the release of Royal Court just around the corner, it's important that we look back and figure out what we liked and what we didn't. Most often, our next steps forward are paved by our knowledge of the ones we took before. So let's examine the last paces on this development road and march into Royal Court armed with knowledge. Today I'm going to talk about the Northern Lords flavor pack and its implementation in CK3 both as a commercial product and as a contribution to the mechanics, storytelling, and overall state of CK3 aside from its cost. I will talk about the good, the bad, and how to improve those systems so they can make for better storytelling and better gameplay. First, let's cover what actually was in the Northern Lords flavor pack. Centered around Scandinavia, the North Sea heartlands, and Russia, the Northern Lords adds in specific mechanics for North Germanic and Anglo-Saxon characters. These mechanics interact with the player in several ways, and also are usable by the player themselves. The main mechanical introductions to the game via Northern Lords are Varangian Adventures, Unlanded Adventures, Runestones, new Legacies, new cultural innovations, new Men-at-Arms, Shield Maidens, personal deities, new events, trial by combat, and the Jomsvikings. This is a list taken from Dev Diary number 53, which I believe contains all the paid aspects of Northern Lords. I want to distinguish as well the mechanics that were added in the accompanying free update, like duels, along with Northern Lords. Although those free additions were awesome, we're keeping the scope small and focusing in on what the player obtains for the price of admission. Let's go down the list. Probably the premier feature in terms of gameplay, Varangian Adventures are nearly flawlessly executed. Any Duke or Count tier character with their Varangian Adventurers innovation can invade a duchy, moving their capital and court to it. They lose all previously held land, and once they win, they get the land in the duchy title, 200 gold, and the Adventurer trait. This mechanic is genius because it uses quantitative rewards like armies, gold, and positive traits to encourage a new playstyle. If this war only gave the user a new duchy, abandoning the homeland, there would be no reason to use it besides personal limitations. Speaking of limitations, the way Paradox has kept this CB in check is excellent as well. The fact that kings and emperors can't use it means that there won't be any suicidal AIs that destroy a whole kingdom, and it means the player has to decide if they want to stay at home or leave. They can't have their foot in the Varangian door for too long. The increasing prestige cost per adventure and the lack of gold reward for subsequent adventures is good as well to prevent continuous adventure spam, but the player still can do it if they want. The Varangian Adventure CB is limited in its mechanical power, but without limiting the player's sense of expression. If the player wants to play a continuously adventuring Viking, they can, while regular players will not feel forced to use adventures over and over out of a desire to play optimally. The lesson we can draw from Varangian Adventures is how to limit a mechanic such that it does not impede freedom for the player. Overall, this is probably the shining star of Northern Lords, and I wouldn't change a thing about its implementation. A cool idea, but a poor implementation. Landless characters with a culture that has the Varangian Adventurers innovation are put in a pool of characters that can be chosen to declare a Northmen army war against anyone within certain regions, namely Britannia, Normandy, the Baltic, and parts of Russia, among others. I genuinely like this system at its storytelling level, but its mechanical implementation is pretty abysmal. Essentially, a Northmen army is either a really annoying nuisance or a game over screen. If you have at least 8,000 troops of reasonable quality, they're a waste of time and money that comes every 10 years to bother you. If you do not have 8,000 troops, then they're a downward spiral of continuously lost wars and debt that you can never recover from. The problem with them is how often they appear and the lack of interaction. I appreciate being able to pull a King Charles and landing them in the duchy they're trying to invade on the condition that they convert and be a vassal. But if you do that, then you suddenly have a vassal with a ridiculous number of troops that essentially controls your realm militarily. To some extent, I can respect how the system represents the overwhelming power of the Vikings and their power over Western Europe, but at a gameplay level, making the player feel powerless is extremely difficult to pull off. At the same time, the compounding problem of Viking settlers makes the player feel smothered and further powerless. Lose one war to a Northman army, and there will be more to keep picking away at you. The funny part about this is that I'm saying it's poorly implemented, but this actually sounds pretty accurate to real Viking invasions. I'm sure the Lindisfarne priests didn't have much fun either. So the system is historically accurate, sure, but this is a video game. It needs to be fun for both sides. How can we fix this system? I think a negotiation system between Viking and ruler would be amazing for both gameplay and storytelling. If historical accuracy is in the game, let's use it more. How about I hire another Northmen army to come fight this one? Now I feel like a cunning lord playing the Vikings against each other. A very real strategy, by the way. How about I give my daughter to the Viking invaders leader and settle him into my land? We're allied now, so he's strong but he can't hurt me, and I paid the price using my daughter. Maybe I send my spy master to figure out if he's got a secret I can threaten to reveal unless he leaves. The possibilities are nearly endless and you can't account for them all, but some kind of trading system could work. I release the hook and you leave, or I give you my daughter and you swear fealty. The lesson from this mechanic is that a system which seeks to create powerlessness in one aspect should allow the player to use other forms of power to circumvent their own powerlessness. This mechanic is a bit of flavor, but it is ultimately just a quantitative mechanic with no storytelling ability whatsoever. A player can spend between 50 and 200 gold depending on their income to raise a runestone. The runestone can be dedicated to a recently won war, a recently deceased family member, or a recently gained rank. They provide different benefits for each type of stone. This mechanic is just a way to transfer gold into prestige, piety, and specific modifiers that last for a few years in one county. The runestones have no impact on your character, and no sense of uniqueness to each character. They're just a part of the quantitative meta in the game, sadly. Not much more to say about them, but let's talk about how to improve them. Something simple could be a reward for the runestone based on the characteristics of the character raising it, like in CK2. It wouldn't be much of an improvement, but it's something. Another way to make them more interesting is to have each runestone provide a very small dynastic bonus, given that runestones are something shared by all Dynasty members. Balancing it could be hard, given that dynastic bonuses are powerful, but how about one runestone per county, and if your dynasty stops ruling over that county, the new ruler can pillage the runestone for some prestige. This way, runestones feel like a legacy that you leave behind as you go, and that you should try to protect. Wouldn't that be an interesting mechanic, both for gameplay and for storytelling? The lesson we can draw from runestones is that sentimentality in a game has to be motivated by value. Given that I love this game so much, I really don't have any emotional attachment to these characters after the 1000th hour of playing. Give me a reason to care. These were pretty good, with one explicit balance problem in making a killing. The legacies are adventure and pillage. Adventure focuses on relationships and adaptation to new cultures and religions, while pillage focuses on fame, fortune, and ransoms. These legacies are pretty good, genuinely. I particularly like adventure, which unlocks new mechanics like sending kids to the Varangians and making friends with vassals for rewards. This was a good direction for legacies to go and encourages a certain playstyle that suits Vikings well. The only problem is making a killing, which gives money per kill in combat. The amount of money this generates is a bit much. It breaks the game balance to obtain this legacy, but I like the spirit of it. How about just double gold from raiding or something instead? I'm not sure what I'd change these to specifically, but some numbers have to change to balance pillage a little better, and other than that, I approve. Legacies encourage forms of power projection and a playstyle that reflects their design. The lesson here is that legacies are an interesting mechanic when used to encourage a certain playstyle that accurately reflects the family taking it. Also, you should watch my other video essay that talks about a few things, including legacies, by clicking the card in the top right. A fairly simple, if effective choice on Paradox's part. The only problem is the lack of mechanical balance. North Germanic cultures, Norman, and English culture get access to longboats, all things, Varangian Adventurers, herds, and Viking tactics. I won't touch on Varangian Adventurers since we already talked about those, but let's talk about the rest. These innovations kind of break the game's balance. Viking tactics and herds, and the men-at-arms they provide, are insanely powerful. We'll talk about them later. Longboats are insanely good, making traveling overseas basically free, and all things is actually pretty tame and probably the most balanced of the innovations. Basically, these innovations make the North Germanic cultures the best culture in the game at a mechanical level, and they do contribute to the feeling of being a Viking pretty well. The problem with them is that they don't just provide flavor to the Viking meal, they make all other meals look like garbage, which ruins the game to some extent. How could we fix this? Well, it's a matter of balance while maintaining the sense of power that Vikings ought to have. Perhaps innovations that provide improvements to men-at-arms which become invalid after the tribal era, similar to how Varangian Adventures can't be used after the tribal era. Maybe innovations which provide benefits for other aspects of Viking life. For example, Vikings were famously hygienic, so they could have an innovation that provides a health bonus, only countering negatives of course. There are lots of other ways to provide unique bonuses to a culture that doesn't make them so powerfully dominant over others. The new innovations should encourage a playstyle that reflects the culture. The Varangian Adventurers innovation does a great job of this. The lesson here is that giving a culture unique traits is not about making it overly powerful, but about giving it bonuses that are well suited to the history, playstyle, and flavor of the culture. The holy grail of imbalance in gaming, right here. These men-at-arms break the game militarily. Viking tactics and herds provide direct upgrades to every basic unit type except cavalry, but the role of cavalry is played by Huskarls anyway. The units are Bondi, Vigmen, Huskarls, and Varangian Adventures. How do we fix these units? It's quite simple. Lower their damage and defense, change their counters, and make them only situationally powerful. For example, the presence of at least one of these units should remove the recently disembarked Malice from an army. This is a powerful bonus, but it's situational and plays into the coastal raid and mobility style of the Vikings. How about these units have a higher commander capture chance? They provide a small amount of gold when moving through a county. They could even raid a county during war to refill supplies or something. Any of these mechanics play nicely into the Viking style, but don't break the game and are only useful if the user is specializing in the Viking tactics that they say they're part of. The lesson of this mechanic is that power is not interesting, the cunning usage of power is. A simple mechanic, done simply and well. Any female character with high enough prowess can be turned into a shield maiden at the cost of prestige. For female-dominant faiths, it's the same, but for men who can become shield swains. I actually don't think this system needs any fixing. It does its job, and doesn't have any balance problems. It's cool to see your daughters go off on raids with your sons, and it suits the culture well. What can we learn? Sometimes simple is good. This mechanic reflects the culture well, adds a new mechanic with a reasonable cost, and makes a cool story. This system is okay how it is, but could be expanded. The player can choose one of the Norse gods as a patron deity. These deities give certain numerical bonuses. Each of the bonuses is quite minor, but it's there. The system could be really cool, but also this could be a case of overly complex design, so take it with a grain of salt. How about the Norse religion has more faiths than just Asatru? Each of the Norse gods can be a faith, and all the faiths can consider each other righteous. These faiths can have different tenets to reflect the nature of that patron deity. For example, Thor would have a focus on military and dueling, while Odin would focus on intrigue and control. Something akin to that. For a flavor pack, it's getting into a somewhat overly complex level, so I can understand why this wouldn't be implemented. The question is, why even implement such a meaningless system at all? The deities are just extra stats for North Germanic characters for no particular reason. Maybe if patron deities could affect event outcomes, we could have a good middle ground, but for now this just feels like a tacked on mechanic with no purpose. The lesson from this mechanic is that sometimes a mechanic is actually better if it weren't there. I genuinely think the personal deities in their current form contribute nothing to the game. Events in CK3 in general suffer from this problem, but Northern Lords continues to as well. So let's talk about events in Northern Lords and in CK3 at a base level. I want to make clear here before I say anything, I do not want to turn CK3 into any other Paradox game. Here's my idea for how to improve events in the game in general, including Northern Lords. Can we get some events that are based on the important historical figures of the timeline? For Northern Lords, how about an event about Saxo Grammaticus? The Danish king hears of a man creating writings about the old gods, and you, as the king, can encourage it, discourage it, or leave it alone. You can spend some piety to get prestige by supporting Saxo Grammaticus, and maybe risk some of your counties becoming a Satru. You can gain some piety by having him executed, if you're Christian that is, and ensure that the old gods stay dead, or you can ignore him and have nothing happen. What would be awesome would be if you could recruit Grammaticus to your court to educate your kids. The downside is that you might make your kids zealous Asatruans. This is just an example of one event that creates flavor and a unique opportunity to give the region more flavor. These events should focus on characters in history and throw them into the world. Wouldn't it be cool to force Saxo Grammaticus into a marriage with one of my daughters and give him a lineage to trace? The problem I can see is that this will somewhat normalize the game if the events are too consistent and happen all the time. I think a good way to stop this would be for the AI to have a high chance of ignoring special characters, and leaving it in the player's hands what to do if they're in the region. Also, a game rule that turns off special characters would be necessary for those players who don't like the historical flavor. The lesson here is that events get repetitive throughout the course of one playthrough, so why not have a few genuinely unique events that only occur once a game, and which add in cool, optional events for the player that want that. A solid mechanic that plays well mechanically and story-wise. If a character commits an act that would allow for imprisonment, instead of doing the percentage chance imprison button, you can duel them. If you win, they go to prison. If you lose, they're no longer a criminal. It's a solid system. It plays well into the mechanics with a sense of risk-reward, and provides a new way to project power. If your intrigue is too low to imprison people, just fight them. That's a solid Viking action right there. I wouldn't change anything. Lesson here is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Sometimes it's genuinely true. It works for what it is. Nothing too complex, the Jomsvikings are a more flavorful holy order that works for the Asatruans even before reforming. They have some flavor events, and these events are not particularly interesting, but are unobtrusive. Even though we could improve the system, I don't think we need to or should. The Jomsvikings serve their purpose well and provide a unique holy order with special flavor just for the Vikings. Leave it as is. Theoretically, this could be expanded one day with a society system like CK2, where rulers could join the Jomsvikings, but that would be in the scope of a larger DLC or perhaps another flavor pack. The lesson here is that a small mechanic could be the platform upon which a later DLC or flavor pack can expand. That's all for the paid mechanics, and I've got to say, it's not bad for the money. The Varangian Adventures alone are worth the 6 USD asking price. As a product, Northern Lords is great, pretty damn cheap for quite a few mechanics and events. As a piece of work independent of its price, Northern Lords shows so much potential but fails on a few things. I think it could be an amazing piece of work with a little more love and expansion of its ideas. Ultimately, I want to express as well that these improvements I'm talking about are not criticism, but more of an exploration of ideas. It's easy to be an armchair game designer, but it's a whole other thing to design an actual game. I will continue to say that Northern Lords commercially is a beautiful package, a quite low price for a solid chunk of content, and my overall opinion on this flavor pack is that it is completely worth it. Looking at Royal Court, I see Paradox heading in a good direction. With that being said, Royal Court is looking kind of expensive for what it's offering. We'll see when it comes out how the value proposition is, but I have high hopes for it at the design level. I certainly hope that Paradox will apply some of these lessons from Northern Lords, but at the same time, I recognize that I'm being extremely demanding with my lessons here, so I fully expect to be disappointed with my bar this high. Regardless, I'm excited for Royal Court, which will be out in just a few hours as of this video coming out. You can certainly expect lots of videos of Royal Court coming very soon. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing. Leave a comment with your opinion. I usually reply to most comments when I can. And check out my Twitch, where I'll be doing at least 24 hours of Royal Court on release day, if not more. Join my Discord if you want updates on what I'm doing. See you there, and thank you for your time.